Welcome to the Crush It in Sales podcast. I'm your host, Melinda Van Fleet. This podcast focuses on the intersection of sales, leadership, and personal development. Now let's get ready to dig in and crush it. Hi, everyone. This week I have special guest, amandazahner. I give a little bit of her and I's background and how we met and chatted in the introduction, but I just want to say this is just a super fun podcast loaded with tips and ideas on building relationships, connecting, and efficiency. Amanda is a CFO of HOLLA Productions, and she has a very well-established background and experience level. She also has her master's degree. And again, I just love chatting with her, so I hope you guys love this podcast as well. As always, I would love if you shared it with a friend, family member, or coworker, as well as a rating and review on Apple. And feel free to check out my other podcast, The Good Karma Success Coach. I dive more into personal development on that podcast, and I've had a lot of great guests that have just fascinating journeys and stories to tell as well. So again, I hope you love this podcast with Amanda. She is a superstar, and I will leave it at that. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the Crush It in Sales podcast.
Hi, Melinda. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited. I love chatting with you. So I'm really excited that you can be on the podcast today. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I was flattered when you asked. So excited to be here and talk to your audience.
Yeah. Well, just a little hindsight there for everyone is Amanda and I connected, maybe 4 months ago?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah. Just connecting through a mutual friend. And we had such a great chat, and she has such an amazing background in what she does now and how she's really moved forward just in, I don't know, what do you want to say? Just taking the leap of faith?
Yeah, I think that's the only way to describe it, right? And definitely, starting maybe even before you're ready, but getting a little bit prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So go ahead and share your story with the audience.
Great. So yeah, Melinda and I met and we had this amazing connection and conversation the first time that we were on the phone. And so it's amazing how life manifests people around you. So I'm the CFO and head of client experience at a company called HOLLA Productions. And I work directly with an author and keynote speaker named Judi Holler. She's amazing. Our company is focused on fear and courage and really experimenting with your fear every day on purpose to kind of get stronger. And it's an interesting path that led me there. So I spent 20 years at a giant company, Procter & Gamble, a consumer goods company, where I really learned how to do business, right? I was educated. I have a master's degree in leadership and management, but real life experience at P&G just set me up to be the leader that I am today. And what I learned was that you can't do much if you're always afraid. And I met Judi at a conference. She was the keynote speaker. And at the time I was getting my master's and I was really shy about talking about the work I was doing because I was putting into practice some of the things I was learning. And I felt like she was talking to me directly in the audience. And I kind of I laugh. We tell the story, I kind of stalked her for a year and I was like, I love you. And I wish I could bring you in. And I wish I could just find a way to bring you into the events that I do. Cause that's what I did at P&G for the last 13 years I was there. I worked as an executive event planner with our board and our CEO. And I just really got the message from her that I needed to make Fear My Homeboy, which is the title of her book. Mm-hmm. And I eventually landed a job with her. I did small work, administrative work for her, starting out 5 hours a week. And then we decided that we were going to grow this business. And about 18 months in, I kind of started thinking, I think we can do this. I actually think that we can make a go of it. And so last September, I left my job after 20 plus years. And we kind of dove in head first to really create HOLLA Productions and what that next phase is going to be. So it's been exciting. We clearly didn't know a pandemic was going to hit, but we've adjusted and we've made pivots in our business. And it's actually forced us to learn and do things that we were not yet ready to do. And we've kind of had to make fear our homeboy. So we're continuously learning every single day.
Yeah, no, I love your story. And, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the podcast too was your story about, building your relationship with Judi and obviously all the other people that you had to work with to plan events when you were at P&G. And I didn't even realize the timeline. I had a figurative of the timeline, but yeah, you said you stalked her for like a year.
I did.
And then you worked with her on the side for 18 months. So I get this right? Yeah. So yeah, you cultivated that relationship, which is what I try to stress to people and even my clients that, building a relationship with someone just takes time and you just kind of keep on going and working at it. So
absolutely. There's so many aspects to relationship building. So one of the questions that vendors always asked us, like in the event business, was like, how do we get in? You seem to always use the same people. And that was always a really difficult question to answer because the truth is, it is hard to get in, right? Because we form relationships, especially in business, over the long term. We build relationships with people, not in meetings generally. We build relationships as we get to know who people are, right? I always told people, I want to know who you are, not what you do, because it's easier for me to do business with the people I know. And so breaking bread, having a meal with someone, talking about their family or their interests outside of work, it just creates a more authentic connection to build a relationship on. And let's be honest, I really feel like most things in life at this point, like it's all based on the relationships that you've built. And you have to have mutually beneficial relationships in order for things to continue to move forward. It cannot be one-sided. You need to be helpful and resourceful, just as you ask for people to kind of fill that role for you. So I believe that relationships have gotten me certainly to where I am today. I mean, as I progressed through my career at P&G, there are 2 or 3 people that were pivotal that I met, that I built trust with, that I had integrity in my work and I worked very hard and I had a good reputation. And as I built that, they were willing to step in and help me and vouch for me. And that's kind of how I moved through the ranks to get the job I did. And then again with Judi, I mean, it took a long time. Judi's ran her business as a solopreneur for 3 years. So to let anyone in, I mean, that's a big risk. And we took our time to learn each other, to trust each other. And it was slowly as our momentum built and she knew that she could rely on me, we were able to kind of build a relationship. But you're right, Melinda, I don't think much can get done anymore with a transactional relationship. I think we all need to know a little bit more about people and who we're dealing with to feel that confidence.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that it really is about getting to know someone and knowing the person versus just their business. And, unfortunately with social media, LinkedIn's a good example. Everyone just tries to get that quick buck on this first, message or connection. And it kind of makes you scratch your head sometimes, right?
It does. It really does. And I find too that one of the amazing things that has come out of the situation we're in with quarantine and relying on Zoom meetings and doing all this video chatting is that we're seeing people for who they are in their own space. And I have seen several relationships that I've had for a long time kind of change because I'm like, oh my gosh, your daughter is so cute. Or I'm seeing the decorations in their house. And you just feel different because now I've been invited into their home and that would have never been a possibility. So I think that's one of the really good things that's come out of this.
Oh yeah, that's a cool way to look at it. Say when we first got on the call and we had the cameras on and I'm like, yeah, my face is all broken out from the mask. But Amanda had beautiful teeth, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, but I mean, isn't it true though? Yeah, so even on our local news, our news anchors are doing the weather from their basement and all of a sudden their kid will walk by or their husband and they're like, oh, sorry, but we've become real humans in all of this. And I kind of like that because you're right. I mean, I get so many, especially when I was at P&G, right? I'd get all of these contacts on LinkedIn, all of these messages. And I'm like, that is never going to catch my attention even. It's not even going to garner a response. There's a great book called Digital Persuasion by Erin Gargan King. And she talks about the pub method, which is this personal way to reach out. And I've adopted what she says because as you try to build relationships, in a social media digital world, it's much more difficult than it used to be.
What does she talk about? I've never heard that book before, so thank you for the suggestion.
Yes, Digital Persuasion. It's actually a book that totally changed, honestly, the way that I write all of my emails, because she says, use LinkedIn specifically. There is so much information that you can find out about a person. Like, don't write them and say, hey, what does your company do? Like, you can look on most everybody has a footprint. So Google them. Find out the information and use that. Try to find a commonality. So here's an example. I was looking to build a relationship because I wanted in a company, right? So I could try to foster some business, right? I think that they're a good fit for what Judi does. And so I was looking who's on their board, and lo and behold, I find someone that's also a P&G alumni.
Oh, wow.
And Procter was spelled wrong, right? And for anybody that works at P&G, that's a pet peeve. And I reached out and said, hey, I was on this website. I noticed Procter was spelled wrong. I'm an alum. I know that that's a thing. Like, I just wanted to let you know. And we built a conversation and we corresponded a few times. I didn't feel like that was the right fit, but he would have never responded if I would have just been like, hey, it was like I was giving him something. Yes. And not asking for anything. So while that never manifested, he is now a contact that I could easily reach out to and he would respond. So it was just kind of her idea of saying, hey, find something, a commonality, offer something like an article, and then use that to start the relationship building versus like a cold call. You're in sales. Cold calling is hard.
Yeah. I've really gotten used to it. I actually love cold calling and I've always felt like it's a game. But what has been fascinating to me over my career is when I was a buyer for Shop NBC, people would call me thinking that we were the airport shops, the newsstands. And I was like, okay, you can just Google Shop NBC. It's an online television shopping with a full website. It's just bizarre. So that was kind of my foray into the fact that people just, I'm going to say this, are lazy and don't put in that, extra 2 minutes that it takes to see. And what is just so fascinating to me, to this day on LinkedIn, I probably get a connection a week that talks about me and being in healthcare and my healthcare practice or healthcare business. I'm like, okay, I'm like not a poster child for healthcare to begin with, let alone have any, background. There's nothing on my profile that says anything about healthcare, like at all. Right. So not even one connection, probably, like really none. And so it is fascinating how people just don't take that time to do a little research before reaching out. And it's just so simple, but people don't do it. You're absolutely right. So
yeah. And it gives you an edge. That's what I have found so incredibly interesting is like what I can spend 1 minute doing could potentially, number one, obviously earn business, but also cut through the chase, like get a response. Because in a world where everyone is always in the race, right? Like we're overwhelmed with now we have direct messages for business on Instagram. Like it's never ending, that it's hard to not just delete. Yeah. I see something, I don't know the person, I'm like, delete. But if somebody can do something thoughtful, if it can just have put a slight bit of thinking into it, it's amazing that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll give them time just because of that. Like it becomes the reason that I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. At P&G, I did it all the time because salespeople contacted me endlessly. And just somebody doing something interesting. One time I'll never forget, I got a calendar and it was like in an old CD case, for those of you that had CDs, like a plastic sleeve. And it had my name on every month. So it would be like a cup of coffee and the foam on the cappuccino would say Amanda. And I thought, oh my gosh, I probably would have thrown most things away, but it was this personalized gift. And I absolutely gave that person my attention. It's just that personal. It's just the small personal touch that can make all the difference.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned about relationships being two-sided versus one-sided. And I'm going to be honest here. I have really struggled with that. And I've had to do a lot of soul searching in the past few months of letting some relationships go where, or just, just not focusing on them anymore. I should put it like that. I'm not like, divorcing a relationship, but more just like kind of moving on, I would say, because I was putting so much energy and really trying to foster a relationship. And I've just realized that, people just kind of have their own MO and are busy or, whatever. And you just kind of move on and keep going and keep trying to find people where it is more collaborative, and you can really build from there. So that's been an interesting journey too.
Yeah. And I'm a people pleaser. So I am a yes person. It is part of my personality. I've been in I feel like my roles in my career even have been, I'm in events. I worked with, C-suite executives. The answer was always yes, right? Yes, I will figure it out. Yes, I will get it done. And, in kind of what you were saying, there comes a point where you have to weed out the relationships that are really one-sided. And sometimes relationships ebb and flow, which also it's like taking that pause, going, just letting it go for a bit, and then you'll come back together. But I really do find that when I volunteered on a board, I learned more about mutually beneficial relationships than any other time. And I always do tell people, if you have an opportunity to volunteer your time, to work with people that don't get paid on a common goal to achieve common objectives really gives you a different sense of working with others than I ever had before. It was one of the experience probably I grew the most from, and I got the most out of it. And those are relationships that have always been mutually beneficial and honestly continue to be the most mutually beneficial. So for me, it was a volunteer organization that really provided me the network that I feel like I have now that kind of helped me get to where I am.
That's really fascinating. So because they took money out of the equation, that it just made everything came from the heart. Is that how you would describe it?
I think so. So I was in the International Live Events Association in leadership. It's called ILEA. And so it was an events organization, but the people that I met, not only in my city, but in the Midwest region, I'm from Cincinnati, and then also the international kind of larger leadership team that I just had a call with someone 2 weeks ago. I haven't been in active leadership for 2 years. And he reached out hey, here's an article. I thought you might want to read it. It kind of felt relevant. And these are people that I have really come to rely on as confidants in business, partly because we're in the same industry, right? So we get it. But then also because we work together. And when you're not getting paid and you're staying committed, it also kind of shows you a different kind of person. So I didn't expect to say anything about volunteerism on this podcast, but truly, some of my most helpful and most mutually beneficial relationships, quite honestly, were born of that experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating and something I've never thought about, heard about, or learned about. So definitely thank you for sharing that. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but I think too, we bond through that, right? We bond through getting through hard things together, solving problems together. It's really about, the way that you can stack wins.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fascinating. And, perhaps now, even with everything going on, there are a lot more volunteer opportunities for people. So if people are looking for relationship building, connecting, maybe they've had a hard time in the past, that could be something to think about, right?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that I even started volunteering, so I was getting my master's and I didn't have anybody reporting to me. So I was doing this work in leadership and management. I was doing all this research and I really didn't have any way to actively, try the theories that we were learning. So somebody they recommended me for the board. Nobody, you're always voluntold, right? Nobody volunteers really. And my colleague was I think you would do great here. And I was there's no way I'm doing that. But then as I used it selfishly. And I also tell people that if you're going to volunteer, be very clear about what you want to get out of it. Because I was this is going to give me experience that I would not get at work, because our organization wasn't structured to provide me that kind of opportunity. And so I used a volunteer job really to get the experience that I needed. And it was super helpful. And it actually gave me the confidence that I could jump with Judi. And I was like, yep, we built it there. I know I can do it. So we can build it with HOLLA Productions too.
That's cool. Yeah. And they say, one breadcrumb leads to another breadcrumb. And it's amazing how all your pieces have come together. So
Amen.
that's part of your journey into your new adventure. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So fun.
So I know one of your big expertise is efficiencies, time-saving tips, organization. Can you share some tips for people today? I would always love some tips.
Sure. Because I side hustled for Judi. And so I didn't even mention this. So I side hustle as an efficiency coach. So part of what I learned in a big business is that there's a lot of value in process. And sometimes in smaller businesses, processes, because one person or two people are managing everything, they're not as well documented or followed because you're just kind of working to get it done. So I'm somebody that believes in doing it the same way every single time. And one of the things I tell people is write it down. So I have lists on top of lists on top of lists. I have lists about everything, for everything, everywhere. And the reason that I suggest that people write things down is because brain space is finite. It's like time. You can only have so many things bouncing around, and it crushes your focus. So if you write something down, you can get it out of your head and it'll be there for you to pick up later, even if you forget about it. And so we do a lot of documenting. So, I think that a lot of times people, especially at work, especially in a small business, they get concerned that it'll make somebody be able to take their job. And yes, it could. But what it does is it gives you the opportunity to hand off work that you don't love to the person that comes behind you, right? That's how I always position it. So I document all kinds of processes, from how we build our MailChimp list to how we manage our CRM. Because all of those things, also the bus test, right? What if I get hit by a bus? Can business continue without interruption should that happen? And I mean, that not to be morbid, but things do happen. So you always just want to make sure that you're set up. So one of the things I say is write it down. If you can't sleep and you have something bouncing around in your head, literally just write it down, put a note in your phone, and you'll be surprised that it frees up some of that space.
Yeah. No, if you saw my office with all the pads of paper, we'd be high-fiving. So you just made me feel a little better about my organizational skills.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, and there's too much going on with too many distractions.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that I am a note taker. You know what I mean? I can look back and go into a certain journal and be like, oh yeah, I saw that speaker and these were the main points that they went through. I just did that the other day for something. Oh, I was telling someone about a presentation I'd seen at Podcast Movement in August, and I couldn't remember the exact numbers. It was a numbers question. And I just was like, I know I took good notes when I saw that speaker, and sure enough, I had it written down in a journal. So there's a lot to be said for taking good notes.
I do that too. I love a journal. I try to it's, I use a leather bound journal, and I keep them, and they're in order of date, obviously. So all my meeting notes, anything I've written down, even some of my just notes from calls, so that I know action items, and I can go back and be like, wow, it's even fun to be able to historically look back wow, that was 5 months ago. It feels like yesterday, right?
Or it feels so long ago, and you're like, oh, that was yesterday.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, we all have so much going on in our brain, and you're right. It just helps to clear it by just taking good notes and getting it off my brain. That is so
right.
true.
And one of the other things I always recommend is, so I'm from Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a little Midwest town in Ohio, and it's called the Ohio method. Only handle it once. Oh. So this is something that I have done for a very long time. And it's my belief, even kind of with email, but if you have something in your hand, execute. If you have dirty dishes, please do not put them in your sink to get to later. Put them in the dishwasher or wash the single plate. And the reason that you need to do that, or when you get your mail from your mailbox, open everything immediately, throw everything in the trash, including envelopes, and keep only what's needed, because you're not going to have time to go back to it. I know that we all want to believe that like we'll get to it, but the fact of the matter is we do not have that kind of time. So dirty dishes in the sink are not fun when you have one, and they're definitely not fun when you have a whole sink full. And oh, by the way, then you've made a mountain out of a molehill. Then it becomes a thing, right? Instead of just eliminating it as you go. So that is something like, and even with email, if you've read an email, either delete it because you don't need to take action, folder it because it doesn't have anything to do with you, delegate it to someone else, or delay it by putting a reminder in your calendar to touch it later. But don't just leave it sitting in your inbox because you're just wasting time. And all of these things create mental clutter. And it's very hard to keep focused and be productive when anything is full of clutter.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I lived in Ohio twice in my life. Did you think of the Ohio to use those letters for that? I think that's great.
It just kind of works out. Like P&G does all kinds of, like I grew up there. So we talk in letters. I am AMZ, right? So everything is by initial. So all of your projects. So it was like, I was writing it down on a slide to give a presentation and I'm like, oh, OHIO, only handle it once. That works.
Wow. That's cool. So that's just ingrained in their culture to think of things like that. That makes it easier to remember. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is cool. So I have a random question, actually. I'd written down some questions, and this one
Awesome.
kind of goes with what we were just talking about. So if you didn't have to sleep, how would you spend your extra 8 hours?
That is such a good question. And I've never had anybody ask that question. So honestly, I love to read. I enjoy reading. I read all kinds of books, but I would say I would spend some of that time reading. And I couldn't imagine not sleeping. So the rest of that would be hard, but definitely reading is something that's time consuming and kind of considered a hobby. So I think I would spend most of my time reading.
Anything else you're reading now? Any great books you want to mention? I know you mentioned Digital Persuasion.
Oh, Digital Persuasion is a good book. So Glennon Doyle is amazing. And most people at this point have heard of Untamed, which is her most recent book. So that was amazing. I'm currently reading Buy Yourself the Beeping Lilies by Tara Schuster. She is a writer, or she works at Comedy Central, and it's kind of a self-help book, but it's not. It's just these rituals that she's learned, but she's a hilarious writer. So it's been really enjoyable, and I've pulled some really great tips out of it.
Oh, wow. I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, it's so good. I've like sucked into it. So I bought the book and I also bought the audio because she reads it, and hearing her voice, it's just great. I mean, I've actually in quarantine changed my journaling as a result of that book. And she references The Artist's Way in her book, and that's kind of what started her. But I really started doing some of the things that she said because we're all struggling a little bit through this quarantine, I feel like. And it's been super helpful. And I wouldn't have done it without a book. That's why I love books.
Yeah. No, you always pick up another great
Are you reading anything good?
What am I reading? Let me look at my stack here. I just finished reading The Prophet of Kindness and Akasha Unleashed. Both of those authors I just had on my podcast. So The Prophet of Kindness by Jill Lublin. I just released that podcast on Crush It in Sales. So if anyone's listening, hasn't listened to that podcast. And then Akasha Unleashed is by Deborah Lupien. And that author is also a spiritual teacher. She's amazing. And I interviewed her on the Good Karma Success Coach podcast. So I've been busy reading books that are for people on my podcast. It's just something I believe in doing. I know most podcast hosts do not take the time to do that, but I do. And so, yeah, that's just kind of been my focus, and they both were awesome. So good for me.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. I'll have to look at those. I'm always looking for recommendations for books because there's so many out there. It becomes impossible to like find new things if they're not recommended from people you trust.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And most often it's funny when I do hear someone give their book suggestions on a podcast, I'm like quickly grabbing a pen and paper and like scribbling it down and then, popping it in Amazon to see what it's all about. But you're absolutely correct, because there's a lot out there and you can obviously spend time and money on things that maybe aren't what you're looking for. So it's cool.
Yeah, and I'm kind of old school, Melinda. I'm not gonna lie. I love the library. So I actually go to the library and borrow books from the library.
That's amazing. You have a good library where you live?
I do. I live in a kind of like, I live in Cincinnati, but I live in a suburb and it's its own city. And we have a really strong library system. It's been really tough because the libraries are closed because of, everything that's going on. But I like to go to the library. There's always been something about it. If you're a reader, I feel like such a dork, and that's fine. I own my nerdness. It's totally cool. It's gotten me where I am today, but I like it. I like going to the library. I love looking at all the books. I think that it's helpful to see all the things that are out there.
Yeah,
and it's free. It's free.
I know, this was so crazy. So when we lived in Minneapolis, if there's anyone out there that is familiar with downtown Minneapolis, we lived downtown and I got laid off, and they have the most beautiful library. It's gorgeous. I get lots of windows, lots of sunlight, great couches. And Ryan was still working at this time and it was winter. So I would walk through the habit trails to go to the library. And as far as they would take me outside, I have to walk a little bit. And I would just sit there for hours. And you're right, it's like shopping because it's all free. You don't have to pay. So you could check out like 20 books.
Yes.
And, as long as you obviously return them. I read magazines and books, and I've always loved the library. But in the Keys, we don't really have the best library. So I don't think I've I've never given it a chance, to be really
It's an underutilized community resource. Mm-hmm. And it's not just books. Like you said, it's magazines, it's movies, it's music. Like there's so many things. There's great things at libraries for children, to get them involved. And the other thing is at my library, they do a digital resource. So it's also audiobooks and ebooks.
Oh, wow. You have a good library. I'm going to come visit.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I love that. And people always laugh, like, you go to the library? Absolutely, I do.
But I'll tell you this really cool story that happened to me just a couple months ago. I had to go back to my OBGYN for an appointment, a checkup, and I'm always carrying books. I always have 1, 2, 3, depends on what I'm doing. I always have books. I'm sure it's the same with you. And I was sitting there waiting for him, and he walked in and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you're reading a book?" And I looked at him, and he's kind of like a smart ass, and he was just like, "No, most people don't, read a book anymore. They're looking at their phone or Kindle." I said, "No, I love books." And he grabbed it from my hands and he started smelling it. And he's just really funny. He's a very, very successful doctor in Miami. And he's in his 70s, even though he looks like he's in his 60s. He's in great shape. And he starts smelling it. And I'm like, okay, what, there's going to be a story here, right? So sure as shit, he said that a study just came out about the smell of books and how it activates a certain part of your brain that really is helpful. And I need to go back and do the study on it and read about it. But it came out, it's extremely valid. Like there's like tons of statistics about it. So colleges are re-implementing having a full library system, and people are really starting to go back to books. So there's actually like scientific data that supports how reading a book, like the actual pages, the smell, is good for your brain. So yeah, it's like really cool. He goes, "Keep reading. It's like really good for you." And like I said, he's like a very, very successful doctor in Miami. Like,
but don't you feel like that's totally true? I mean, for me, it is like don't get me wrong. I'll read an ebook. I will do all of those things because it's easier to have it on my phone, but there is nothing like a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to even novels, which are a lot easier for me to read on a Kindle or whatever. But then it's like, I like to give someone the book so that we can talk about the book, right? It's like people talk about TV shows all the time. I'll be like, did you read the new Harry Potter book? I want to talk about it. Yeah. I mean, it's just something, again, like if you're a reader, you get it. And if you're not, you should try a book a month.
Yeah, seriously. And you might be surprised. And, I love to use sticky notes and highlight and pen and fold down pages. And and all that. It's just a reference, especially I write so much. So I always have to go back and reference something, a quote or a little paragraph. And it just really helps to have the actual book for that too. So
yes, it does.
Yeah.
My kindred sister over there.
Yes. High five, girl. So I'm going to ask you one more question. What's something you wish people would ask you that they don't normally ask you?
Oh my gosh, such good questions. I think that, oh my gosh, you've like stumped me. So a question that I wish people would ask me. I think that something that I love to talk about is, besides obviously we all like to talk about ourselves. I think that that's part of the human condition. But like, people do not ask me often what I'm reading, and it is probably what will get me the most excited. And then following that, like asking me about interests that are not business related. So especially if I'm in a conversation with people that I've just met, like the biggest turnoff is like, what do you do? That's so unoriginal, So it's like, hey, what, just asking cool, more conversation starters of like, hey, where's the last place you went on vacation? Like just questions about things that are happy and definitely the fiber of who we are as humans, not as business people.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I was actually on a podcast yesterday. It was her podcast, and the theme of her podcast was talking about talking to strangers. So that was kind of part of it, right? Is how do you have conversations that aren't just about the weather,
Right.
And how do you have that conversation that's more of a soft conversation versus, what do you do for a living, right? And
it kind of like
so
breaks
true.
away the awkwardness because there's only so much I can small talk about. I'm not
Right.
really a great small talker, even though I've been in a kind of social job forever. So it's like if you ask someone about like their favorite place they've ever went on vacation or a book, like it opens the opportunity to have an expansive conversation versus like, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Yeah.
You
So
know?
so when this is all over, where are you going to go on vacation? Tell us this.
So I have Melinda and I were talking at the beginning before we started the podcast. I have a friend in the UK. We met on vacation
Oh, wow.
about like 7 years ago. We've kept in touch. She is a dear friend of mine, a beautiful soul, and we have promised that the first thing we do is a faraway vacation as friends. So I'm going to meet her. She lives in London, and we'll probably vacation somewhere with a beach in Europe.
Good for you. That sounds amazing. I love it.
I hope it's sooner than later because, we just want things to go back. But yeah, definitely. How about you?
We are scheduled to go on vacation over the 4th of July. So, and I'm just keeping it. We'll see how life turns out this next month and a half, right?
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, we always go away for the 4th, and we'll just see how this lands. That's all I know.
Yeah. That's what we're doing a lot of.
Yeah, definitely. So how can everyone get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website that's really focused on like my coaching business, and it is amandazahner.com, and that's AMANDAZ like zebra, AHNER.com. All of my details are there. You can shoot me an email, or you can reach out to hello@Judi Holler if you're interested in some of the work that we're doing at Holler Productions, and that is hello@Judi, Judi, Holler, HOLLER.com.
That is awesome. Well, we could probably chat all day. So
I feel like we could.
I know, it's kind of, I'm like, I could just keep going. I better look at the time otherwise. Yeah. So it's super fun having you on. I hope the audience really loves your tips and books and everything you shared and feels inspired. And just thank you. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.